Welcome to Education in Focus. I'm your host, Eliana Kernodle. A report released last week estimated that culturally divisive conflicts cost school districts $3.2 billion during the 2023-2024 school year. It also said that schools could have saved $1.96 billion by reducing conflict. Joining me to discuss this is Chalkboard News editor Brendan Clary. Brendan, who wrote this report and what did they have to say?
A group of researchers from the UCLA, the University of Texas at Austin, American University, and the University of California, Riverside, they put together a report that relied on survey questions from 467 superintendents, and they did 42 follow-up interviews. And some of them, they quoted some of those interview materials pseudonymously with some of these superintendents and had, fake names there to describe like, okay, here's their situation. So all of this in an effort to try to quantify the cost of culturally divisive conflict. That's the term that they used to describe these things. And I think I've written about these a lot. I think we've all seen this, nationally or in our local school districts of people talking about, the cultural divides in the school boardroom, essentially, right? Like the LGBTQ plus policies, right? Transgender policies, locker room policies, content moderation. What books should students be able to have access to? Should they have access to that book, right? The one that's been banned in, a couple of states or, it's been removed. And then should we use the word banned or removed? Like there's a lot of these different kinds of things. And there's a lot of different values that are ascribed to those different kinds of terms and those different kinds of words. And, so all of these are really fraught politically, a lot of like hot button issues. And so what they were trying to ascertain is how much are those issues costing school districts? How much has that, raised the price of the education system essentially? And what they base that on was, do superintendents say that they've experienced cultural division and like this conflict, and how do they rate their school district and, maybe what they spend. And so it's a look at indirect costs and also direct costs. So how much did you spend on school security? How much did you spend on, a new PR person or like a changing role for a PR person? How many people have left the district? So it's all encompassing. So I think that that's something to think about with that 3.2 billion number. And also the 1.96 billion number is how much some of that is indirect costs versus, direct costs. So that's what they were trying to do. And another thing that the report found was that the high conflict districts cost $80 more per student. These moderate districts cost $50 more per student. And these low conflict districts cost $25 per student. And so that's how they kind of tallied that here's how we save money, and get down to that $1.96 billion in savings is through kind of that sort of tally and applying it to a national focus. So one of the other things is how do you reduce that conflict, right? What are the ways that you can sort of say, okay, we have like a high conflict district where, people are being outspoken. You have groups like Moms for Liberty and Parents Defending Education coming in and saying like, we don't want to have these books in our library. How do you reduce that conflict? And what the report authors said in the conclusion of their report was essentially we need to diminish the opportunities for, quote, conflict entrepreneurs to disrupt and distract and gain power in school board meetings and elsewhere. And again, I'm quoting from the report, such efforts would not prevent evidence-based or value-based disagreements regarding school policies, and that disagreement is appropriate and to be expected in diverse democracies. But rejecting this small number of conflict entrepreneurs would help ensure that community members communicate their disagreements in a manner consistent with democratic principles. And I spoke to the co-founder for Moms for Liberty, Tiffany Justice, and she said that is nonsense. She disagreed with the entire sort of premise of the report. And she said that it's sort of ridiculous to try to say that parents or, these organizations who are speaking out are the problem. Because she said she called it obfuscation. She said it's deflection. And she said basically like, we're not going to be silenced for speaking out on what she called a failing system, right? And she said, if schools were not trying to get away with ideological warfare almost, and she didn't use that terminology, but she said like trying to put stuff into the school district that parents disagreed with, then we wouldn't have the problem. And so that's what she told me. And again, that what would be the better thing? Like, what would you do instead? And so she said, we just shut up and go along with the indoctrination and the demoralization of our children so we don't cause a problem and cost the school district money. And I think that that's kind of what, you get into if you say like, what is the problem? Or like, what is the problem if it's conflict? Is it that they're speaking out, right? What is sort of the issue and how do you tamp that down. And so I think the report authors are saying you need to, diminish and reduce. And it doesn't get a lot more specific than that. I spoke to the lead author of the report, John Rogers, who's a professor of education at UCLA. And he said that there is a lot of different kinds of divisive topics, especially around, schools closing and that kind of thing, but that these, what he called conflict campaigns around culturally divisive issues, that they're a little bit different. So that's something that he said was, it's not just like, hey, we're shutting down a school, or hey, we somebody messed up and we want to talk about it as a community. He said, that they're coordinated, they're highly resourced, and they're connected to broader networks. And so he called them a real and pressing challenge to school district leadership, as well as to public education and American democracy more generally. He said it's important to name the fact that a key to the health of public education is to simply diminish the power of these conflict campaigns. So again, we have these deep divides here. You have a parental rights group leader saying that it's actually not the parents' fault. It's the school districts. They need to listen to what parents are saying, and they need to follow it, and they need to do it. And we're not going to stop until we get what we want, which is for our schools to teach kids to read and to not be filled with what they say is indoctrination. And then on the other side, you have the researcher who talked to superintendents saying, these organizations or these broader networks, these conflict entrepreneurs is another term that they use in the report. These are the problem, and that we need to fix it by minimizing the amount of impact that they can have. And another thing that Roger shared with me was that, superintendents and principals could partner with community leaders and essentially try to build sort of a coalition there and have them come in and talk at school board meetings sort of in opposition and be more vocal about these kinds of issues than you would be able to as a nonpartisan. And he said that, others within the community, can speak more forcefully and sometimes call out sectors of the community that it would be difficult for a district superintendent or a principal to do. And that you need to have that respect and be seen as a fair operator. And so you need members of the community to push on issues that they can't directly lean into in the same way. So essentially have other people, invite other groups and organizations and people in to discuss these things instead of you discussing them yourselves, to have that, you want to have that appearance of being completely neutral and somebody who works for, the entire community.
Well, Brendan, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at chalkboardnews.com.